The moment my late husband Thomas's attorney cleared his throat and prepared to read the final will, I reached into my purse and pulled out the small, black voice recorder, clicking play. The sound of my brother-in-law, Mark, casually suggesting that the lawyer misplaced the codicil that named me as the sole beneficiary, echoed through the quiet, mahogany, paneled room. The look on my mother-in-law's face, a mask of righteous grief instantly replaced by pure, unadulterated terror, is a memory I will carry to my grave. It was a moment of absolute, heart-stopping silence, broken only by Mark's frantic, whispered curse. But let me ask you, before I get into the brutal details of how I got to that point, was I wrong for not just standing up to them, but for completely dismantling their lives in front of everyone they respected? Tell me if you would have done the same thing. To truly understand this, I have to take you back, way back, to when Thomas and I first met. We were college sweethearts, two broke kids with ridiculously oversized dreams. He was the kindest man I'd ever known, a man who saw the world in shades of possibility, not cynicism. Thomas came from money, not old money like some fictional dynasty, but definitely comfortable wealth, all built by his father, George, who had founded a successful regional manufacturing company. George was a wonderful man, a second father to me, but his wife, Eleanor, and their other son, Mark, were different. Eleanor was the quintessential society matriarch, obsessed with appearances and control, and Mark, well, Mark was a professional disappointment. He'd coasted through life, failed at 3 different business ventures funded by his father, and harbored a deep, simmering resentment for Thomas, who had inherited his father's integrity and work ethic, but not the company itself. George had sold the company years ago, investing the capital wisely, and that was the source of the significant estate. For the first 10 years of our marriage, Thomas and I lived a modest life. We were happy to be free of the pressure of the family's wealth, focusing on our careers. But the relationship with Eleanor and Mark was always strained. They viewed me as an interloper, a gold digger who wasn't good enough for Thomas, though they never dared to say it to his face because Thomas had a quiet, iron spine when it came to defending me. George, bless his soul, tried to be the mediator, often pulling me aside to apologize for their behavior, assuring me that Thomas was his favorite and that I was the daughter he never had. George passed away 5 years ago, and that's when the real subtle warfare began. His will was clear. Thomas was to inherit 80% of the estate, and Mark would get the remaining 20% along with a substantial trust fund that George had set up for him years prior, which Thomas always joked was Mark's get-out-of-jail free card. Eleanor was taken care of separately through a prenup that guaranteed her a comfortable, lifelong income, but gave her no control over the main estate assets, which was a point of deep, abiding bitterness for her. Then, the unthinkable happened. Last year, Thomas was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. We fought it with everything we had, spending weeks in hospitals, pouring every ounce of our emotional and financial energy into the battle. It was a brutal, soul-crushing time, and through it all, Thomas was worried about me. He would often hold my hand and tell me, "Don't let them take your peace, darling. Everything is taken care of." He meant Eleanor and Mark. Even in his weakest moments, he knew they would circle like vultures. 3 months ago, Thomas finally succumbed. The grief I felt was a physical weight, a darkness that threatened to consume me whole. I was barely functioning, just trying to navigate the endless paperwork, the funeral arrangements, and the suffocating silence of our home. This is where the plot thickened, and my suspicion, born of years of their micro-aggressions, turned into cold, hard resolve. A week after the funeral, Mark and Eleanor showed up unannounced. They didn't come to offer comfort. They came to discuss the will. Elinor, draped in dramatic black, informed me, with an air of superior pity, that while Thomas's previous will had named him the primary inheritor of George's estate, Thomas had, in his final, confused days, drawn up a new codicil. Mark, who was standing beside her with a smug, almost eager look, chimed in, saying, "Yes, a very generous codicil, which names Elinor and myself as the co-executors and main beneficiaries. Thomas just wanted to ensure the family's legacy was handled properly, you see. You wouldn't want the burden of all that complexity, would you?" My mind went blank with shock, then red with rage. I knew Thomas. He was meticulous, detail-oriented, and above all, deeply devoted to me. He wouldn't have done this. And the idea of him being confused infuriated me. He had been clear, headed, if weak, right up until the end. I asked to see this new codicil. They demurred, claiming it was with the attorney, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had worked with the family for years. I played along. I nodded, mumbled something about trusting Thomas's final wishes, and thanked them for looking out for me. I let them leave, and the second the door closed, I collapsed. But I only let myself cry for an hour. Then I dried my eyes, and a steel core of determination set in. They had messed with the wrong widow. My Thomas had trusted me, and I was going to honor that trust by fighting these vipers. The first thing I did was call Mr. Henderson. He sounded nervous. When I asked about a new codicil, he said he couldn't discuss the contents of the will until the official reading, which was set for 2 weeks later. The nervousness in his voice was my first clue. I hired my own private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Sandra, and instructed her to look into Mark's recent financial activities and Mr. Henderson's firm. What Sandra found was damning but predictable. Mark was in deep financial trouble, leveraged to the hilt, and facing bankruptcy, which would explain his desperation. More alarmingly, she found that Mr. Henderson's firm had recently received a substantial, uncharacteristic consulting fee from a shell corporation tied to Mark. Blackmail or bribery, it didn't matter. The lawyer was compromised. I realized I couldn't trust anyone involved in the official reading. I had to get the evidence myself. I knew Elinor and Mark regularly met at Elinor's house, a sprawling estate far from the watchful eyes of the city, to coordinate their lies. I found an old, unused key to a guest room Thomas and I used to stay in years ago. The room was adjacent to Elinor's home office, where they did most of their planning. The night before their next scheduled meeting, I drove out there. I packed a small, state-of-the-art voice recorder, the same one I would eventually use, and managed to slip into the guest room unnoticed. I stayed there, hidden, until I heard them arrive. My heart was pounding like a drum solo. I located a small, decorative ventilation grill that connected the guest room closet to the back of Elinor's massive desk. It was the perfect listening post. I activated the recorder, setting it inside the grill. It was terrifying, risky, and felt like something out of a bad movie, but I was doing it for Thomas. The next few hours were the most nauseating of my life. I heard it all. Mark's whiny voice complaining about his debts, Elinor's cold, calculating responses, and the sickening details of their plan. They weren't just forging a document. They were going to pressure Mr. Henderson to claim Thomas was addled by medication, and had instructed him verbally to change the beneficiaries just days before his death. Mark actually laughed, a truly awful, scraping sound, and said, "The gold digger won't stand a chance. It'll be a she," he said, "and who are they going to believe? My mother, the pillar of community, or Thomas's waitress wife?" That comment, waitress wife, even though I now hold a master's degree, cut me to the bone. It confirmed everything I suspected about their deep-seated contempt. I got the full plan. They'd present a poorly forged codicil to Mr. Henderson just before the reading, ensuring he had minimal time to scrutinize it, and he would back their story in exchange for the payoff. I retrieved the recorder when they left, my hands shaking, but my mind absolutely clear. The evidence was irrefutable. It was all there: names, dates, the payoff to Henderson, and the cruel, dismissive way they spoke about Thomas and me. So that's the situation I was in. I had this explosive recording, the key to protecting Thomas's legacy and my future, but using it meant a public, humiliating war, exposing the man Thomas's family was, and dragging his memory through a messy legal battle. Before I tell you what happened next, what I decided to do with that recording, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have gone to the police, filed an injunction, or, like I did, waited for the perfect moment for maximum impact? I chose the latter. I decided I wouldn't file an injunction and wouldn't go to the police yet. Why? Because I wanted their public humiliation to be as profound as the betrayal they had visited upon me. I wanted them to feel the ground drop out from under them in the presence of the people they sought to impress, their friends, their peers, and the executor of the estate who Thomas and George genuinely respected. I spent the next week quietly meeting with a new, highly ethical attorney, a man I could trust, and played him the recording. His face went pale. He immediately contacted the presiding judge who handled estate litigation in our area and presented the evidence confidentially. The judge, recognizing the potential for fraud and the compromised position of Mr. Henderson, issued a highly unusual order. A neutral, unattached attorney, M.S. Davies, would be present at the will reading, and the proceedings would be officially recorded by the court. No one else knew about M.S. Davies except my lawyer and the judge. My plan was set. I would let them start their play, let them commit to the lie, and then I would hit them with the truth. The day of the reading arrived. It was in a solemn, hushed room at Mr. Henderson's office. Mark and Elinor walked in radiating false sorrow and what I can only describe as predatory confidence. They gave me a patronizing hug, telling me to be brave, and assuring me they would look after me. I simply smiled, a thin, almost invisible smile. Mr. Henderson sat at the head of the table, looking pale and unwell. Beside him sat a woman I recognized from the legal community, M.S. Davies, introduced merely as an observer by Mr. Henderson, which was part of the judge's discreet arrangement. The reading began with the usual formalities, and then Mr. Henderson got to the crux of it. He started reading the original will, the one George had left. Everything was going according to plan. 80% to Thomas, 20% to Mark, etc. Then he paused, took a deep, shaky breath, and following their script announced, however, Thomas, in his final days, realizing the complexity of the inheritance, issued a verbal instruction and a signed codicil. It was precisely at that moment, as Elinor was leaning forward, her eyes glittering with triumph, and Mark was giving me a smug, pitying glance, that I acted. I reached into my purse, pulled out that little black recorder, and pressed play. The first voice was Mark's, loud and clear. So, we tell Henderson that Thomas was basically too doped up to know what he was doing, and that he verbally instructed him to change the split to 50/50, and that the forged codicil we gave him is just to help the process. Then Elinor's cold voice cut in, "It's not 50/50, Mark. It's 70 for us, 30 for her, and no, you don't mention the payoff yet. We wait until she cries foul. We have to ensure that our legacy is..." Protected from that gold digger, the recorder continued to play their entire sordid conversation, detailing the coercion of Mr. Henderson, the exact amount of the bribe, and their deep, cruel contempt for me. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly from funereal solemnity to utter chaos. Eleanor let out a sharp, choked gasp, her face going from ash, white to beetroot red. Mark actually lunged across the table toward me, shouting, "You bitch! What is that? Turn that off!" Ms. Davies, the silent observer, was suddenly on her feet, holding up her hand, her voice firm and authoritative. "Mr. Henderson, Ms. White, Mr. Smith, that is enough. This room is now under the jurisdiction of the court. The recording is entered as evidence of attempted testamentary fraud and conspiracy." The sheer authority in her voice stopped Mark mid-lunge. Henderson was literally sweating, his head in his hands, mumbling something about being pressured. The shock on the faces of the few non-family witnesses was a thing of satisfying, cold beauty. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Ms. Davies, with the court's prior arrangement, immediately seized all relevant documents and Thomas's original will, securing it from any further meddling. Mr. Henderson was immediately suspended by the Bar Association, and Mark and Eleanor were hit with civil suits for attempted fraud and emotional distress. More importantly, they were utterly disgraced in their social circle. The news, though not reaching major headlines, was the talk of their entire community. Eleanor's carefully constructed image of grace and high society crumbled overnight. Mark's last remaining business associate cut ties with him, and the bankruptcy he was trying to stave off with Thomas's money finally arrived, only worse, because now he had a criminal investigation looming over his head. As for me, Thomas's will, the one he drew up months before his diagnosis, the one that named me the sole inheritor and executor of George's estate, was upheld. Mark's 20% inheritance was held in escrow pending the resolution of the fraud case, and the court later awarded a large portion of it back to the estate and toward my legal fees. It wasn't the money that mattered, it was the peace. I finally had the peace Thomas wanted for me, the peace to mourn my husband without the constant, toxic presence of his family trying to steal his last gift. The moral of this story is simple. Love is not just about kindness. Sometimes it's about having the fierce, protective instinct of a lioness, ready to fight for the one who can no longer fight themselves. I protected Thomas's memory and his intentions, and in doing so, I finally got my justice. So there it is, the whole ugly truth. I hope you found my choice to fight fire with fire satisfying. If you were on my side, and you think I did the right thing by hitting them where it hurt the most, please like this video right now. Subscribe for more stories like this. I have a few more from my years dealing with the in-laws that you won't believe. And finally, please share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Did I go too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know. I'll see you all in the next story.